We'll be talking now about social interaction process theories. I want to briefly discuss how continuity or interaction style might guide some of these types of theories. There are two main interactional style theories, cumulative continuity and interactional continuity. First, let's discuss cumulative continuity. This theory assumes that the child will select and create the environment that fits their preferred form of behavior. So for an example, a shy child will seek a social setting where there is little social contact. Or an extremely extroverted child is going to try to select an environment or a social setting where they can have lots of interaction. So here's an example. The shy child, what kind of after-school activities might they want to seek out? Perhaps the chess club. Maybe band, because even though they're in a group setting, they're not interacting directly with other people. The extroverted child, the child that's not shy, they might seek out the drama club looking for the lead roles, or something where there's much more social interaction. So the idea there is that by seeking a specific social setting, that child then is reinforcing already existing behavior. And so the idea of cumulative continuity is that there's a snowball effect, that the process becomes cumulative over time. The more the child seeks something they're comfortable, the less they look outside of their comfort zone, then the more likely it is that they're going to be reinforcing the kind of personality and seeking the type of social setting that continually reinforces instead of challenging themselves to develop new social skills. Social interaction process theories also include what's known as interactional continuity. This looks at the actual transaction between the person and the social environment. So an example is an aggressive child that expects others to be hostile. That child acts aggressively and thus triggers even more hostile behavior. So interactional continuity is looking not just at the social setting, but how that child is interacting with the social setting that it has chosen. Now, both of these theories can be applied to any kind of adolescent behavior. So some behavioral theorists will look at human sexuality from that aspect of the social interaction process and how that child interacts between either the social setting or what kind of behavior it is expecting at the social setting. Social interaction process theories also includes culture and social learning theories. So something that a social learning theory might look at is the type of characteristic that a child develops depending on the types of toys or the types of environment that the parents are placing them in. So for example, there are messages that children get through their play. Play is very important. Play is not only a form of recreation, but it's a way for a child to envision what their future roles, what their future opportunities may be. So you have to ask yourself, what are the messages that girls receive when they're encouraged to play with dolls or small-scale appliances? What is the message that a child receives when they have floral designs and ruffles on their clothes? So girls don't get toys very often, such as wagons or boats or construction equipment. Those types of toys are associated generally with boys. So what is the message that a girl receives when they have floral designs on their clothes or ruffles? That you should be delicate, that you should not be rough, that you should not engage in things that might damage the delicate items. Flowers smell good. Flowers are delicate. Flowers are pretty. Those are all the types of things that girls then start to associate with themselves. Boys, on the other hand, are encouraged to play with things like sports equipment, encouraging them to be competitive, military items, encouraging them to be dominant, building toys, encouraging them to build great things, machines that then empower them to do the building, and vehicular toys, things like boats and cars and airplanes. And the message there is that you should go out and have great adventures. So the general messages that girls get from the motifs that are on their clothes, the designs that are on their clothes, or the toys that they're given, stay within the confines of the home. that it's the domestic sphere. Even if you go outside, think about flowers, think about growing things, creating a garden. The garden is the gathering role. The gatherer role is the role of the individual that stays close to the tribe. You don't go out as a warrior. You don't go out to hunt. Playing with dolls encourages girls to become nurturers and caretaker. It emphasizes their purpose in life is to be the primary caretaker of the children. And playing with small appliances or doll houses encourages the role of the person that maintains the private sphere or the domestic area. Boys, on the other hand, they're directed away from the home. Vehicular toys tell them to go and explore, to conquer or be dominant, to build, to create, and to compete. Social scientists decided to try to test their theories about whether parents encourage their children to take on certain qualities and characteristics. And the scientists were curious as to at what age parents might ascribe certain characteristics to an infant. So scientists create an experiment where they put adults in a waiting room and they observed the adults, and the adults were given a baby to hold, to watch over that baby while they were waiting for what they thought would be the experiment. But of course they were being watched and observed during that period of time. And so the adults were given a baby. Now it was the same baby each time, but the baby was dressed differently. We're told in some instances that they were either holding Adam when the baby was dressed like a boy, or that they were holding Beth when the baby was dressed like a girl. So those adults then described the baby. And those that were holding Beth offered her a doll. They viewed her as being a sweet baby. They said the baby had a soft cry, and they treated the baby as more fragile. So even though it was the same baby, just the way the baby appeared, how it was dressed, and what the parents were told, they thought of the child as having different characteristics. In another experiment, social scientists set up a situation where mothers were asked to wait in a room with a 13-month-old baby of their own. And so what this experiment discovered was that boys were allowed to venture out further than their mothers, that boys could walk further away before the mother would get up and walk after the baby and retrieve them. Girls, they would retrieve a little bit sooner. They also found that boys tended to look and talk to their mothers less frequently. So as the boy wandered out, he was less inclined to turn back and look at his mother or talk to his mother, where a little girl would do that. And the researchers also found that boys manipulated their environments more aggressively. Social learning theorists also have explored issues like homophobia in society. So their findings there are that boys tend to hide their emotions more as they get older, and then adolescent boys then become less expressive as they grow into manhood. It's less acceptable for men to have female traits. For example, if a woman is assertive, she's not as heavily criticized as a man who acts submissive. Women, on the other hand, are allowed to dress in men's clothing, and that's not as questionable as a man who's dressing in feminine clothing. So it's this idea that it's socially acceptable to power up. It's more socially acceptable to take on the characteristics of the dominant group than it is the subordinate group. So it's more acceptable for females to have male traits than it is vice versa. Women, on the other hand, are socialized more to be dependent, whereas men are socialized to be more independent. Women more often seek nurturance or helping or caretaking in their partner, and women are more likely to ask for help or protection or for touching. And the great example there is the widely held social notion that men are less likely to ask for directions if they get lost. So while the differences do start to develop in adolescence, at the same time, young females will recognize about the age of 5 that typical male role models are more important and have higher value in society. So little girls about age 5 realize that roles like doctor or roles like manager or airplane pilot. These are the types of roles that tend to have more importance and have higher economic value in society. And finally, I want to talk about two of the seminal content studies that were done back in the 1980s. There's a study called the Weitzman study. It's a media content study, and what it looked at were the popular best-selling books for little children. Those are what's called the Caldecott, that's the Caldecott Award books, and what are known as the Little Golden Books, sometimes the first readers. And so what those content studies found back in the 80s was that the ratio of males to females were 11-1, that the boys tend to have much greater adventures, and when the girls were depicted, they were shown to remain indoors, they were passive, and actually that's a typo there, they were considered dependent. They certainly weren't independent. The women that were pictured in the book, the adult women, did not have professions. They were stay-at-home type of mom roles. This study was done in the 1980s, and while there have been some changes, there still tends to be the same type of stereotypes that are depicted more often than not. The Richardson study was a study that looked at toys that were bought at Sears. So they set up camera at the Sears toy department and tracked where parents took their children. And the girls were directed to the aisles that had toys that involved homemaking play, where the boys were steered to the aisles that had vehicles and building toys, toys that allowed them to manipulate their environment. So what the researchers were collecting data on were those parents that walked their child to specific alleyways. They didn't collect the data on the children that were leading their parents, but they wanted to look at what direction parents were taking their own children and which aisleway, what toys they were encouraging them to buy. So that is the end of our first unit. This unit looked at sociological paradigms and also sociological theories that might be applied to understanding human sexuality. The next unit is going to look at gender and sexual orientation as well as sexual identity.